Perhaps more so than any other aspect of being a game master, campaign planning can be an extremely daunting task. Whether you're running your first campaign or your 50th, there's a good chance that you'll spend some time looking at whatever device you use to write things down and ask yourself, where do I even start? There are so many things that you need to take into consideration: locations, encounters, villains, NPCs, treasures, and you can make that list go on and on until you eventually forget what your campaign was supposed to be about in the first place. It doesn't help that some of the advice in books like the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide is either overly vague or really narrow, especially when it comes to planning the big picture. So I've made this video in order to provide what I think is a pretty straightforward and reliable template for planning your campaign. I'm not saying that it's the one true way or anything, but I do think that it can reduce a lot of headache for GMs in need of some direction. So here's how to plan your campaign in 3 easy steps. Step 0 is to have an intro session. I made a video on intro sessions a few weeks ago, and I really do think that it should be treated as a prerequisite for planning your campaign. You get your group together, pitch the basic concept, get introduced to the PCs, and then flesh out the campaign to suit the characters and maximize player enjoyment. If you have to start planning your campaign before getting to know the characters, you can still use this guide, but you'll probably need to wait a session or 2 before working on step 3. With that out of the way, step 1 is to flesh out the main threat or problem of your campaign, something that can serve as an active antagonistic force. Sometimes this is obvious. If the campaign is about rising up against a Dark Lord, then there you go. But you can make this work with pretty much any type of plot. If your campaign is about finding lost treasure, then there can be another group trying to reach it before you. If it's about establishing a safe haven on a distant planet, then maybe there's an alien empire looking to wipe your settlement off the map before it gains any serious traction. Whatever your big bad might be, you have 2 important jobs. The first is to simply flesh out your villain or villainous force in terms of character. Jot down their appearance, history, personality, motivation, and game statistics. The other is to write up a series of bad things that could happen as a result of their actions. Ideally, these should progress in worsening order, with the threat that these problems will escalate if the PCs don't step in. For example, the Dark Lord's army might burn down an outpost and kidnap an important general, and if the heroes don't rescue that general, the Dark Lord might learn about the secret entrance to an otherwise impregnable valley. That brings me into my second step, which is to establish a goal for the PCs and detail some steps that they might take to reach that goal. Sometimes defeating the previously mentioned enemy is the core objective, like in the case of the Dark Lord, but sometimes the enemy is just a recurring obstacle, like in the case of the lost treasure. In either case, you should try to ensure that they need to reach multiple of these milestones to achieve their goal, but not necessarily all of them. For example, if the PCs are searching for the lost treasure in an ancient ruin, then they'll have to learn the location of the ancient ruin no matter what. They'll also need to find a way to open its gates, either by coming across an old key or by gaining the favor of some locals to conduct an excavation. For each of these milestones, you should include a plot hook that'll grab your player's attention, along with at least one encounter to provide some challenge for the PCs. You should generally try to avoid giving plot hooks for objectives that are redundant with what the PCs already have. For example, if the locals have already agreed to an excavation, then you should try to steer your players away from the key. But if they look after the key anyway, you should provide some extra reward. Maybe that key is inscribed with the location of a secret chamber that no one would be able to find otherwise. When you can, you should try to connect these milestones to players' backstories and motivations, which brings me into my next point. For each PC, you should write down at least one complication that ties into their background or personal goals. These should form the basis for your side quests and roadside encounters. For example, if you're playing the Space Colony campaign, maybe one of your PCs is an outlaw, and in that case, you could include a bounty hunter with a personal vendetta against that character. If another PC is looking for a rare flower for scientific research, then you should provide a session's worth of challenges that they need to overcome in order to retrieve it. If one of the characters has a dark secret, then you should introduce an NPC from their past to reveal the truth to the rest of the party. Whenever possible, these side challenges should at least peripherally tie into the central conflict or goal. Defeating the bounty hunter or finding the flower will improve the well-being of the colony in some way, and the fallout resulting from the uncovered secret might shift its leadership dynamics. But ultimately, the primary purpose of these side stories is to either break a lull in the action, or to distract your players before they enter an area or start a quest that you haven't fully planned. And that brings me to my final point, which isn't a specific step as much as a general guideline, and that's to not work too far ahead. Sure, it feels nice to put down your notes after having written out what you intend to be every detail of the entire campaign, but it's just not worth the frustration you'll feel when the players start taking the campaign in a very different direction than what you expected. Plus, if you wait until your players are within reach of an encounter before you fully plan it out, it'll feel more personalized and less generic than if you planned it way in advance. So really, when you're planning your campaign as a whole, I don't think you need to detail anything other than the bird's eye view I've described in this video. Although you should establish a little more detail about the encounters that the players might face in the first session. That might necessitate a video about encounter design, which I'll certainly make in the near future. I did make a video about D&D combat encounters a while ago, which I think is decent for what it is, but I'm still interested in talking about other types of encounters across multiple systems. For now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.